Stay indoors as much as possible. That's the warning from public health during this ongoing heat wave. But for unhoused populations, that inside relief from dangerous temperatures, we know is just not an option. So here to tell us more is outreach worker Lorraine Lamb. Welcome to the show. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
So what effects do you see extreme heat having on those who are experiencing homelessness?
I mean, just like how it affects most people, it's harder to breathe, it's hot, it's uncomfortable. The thing for people who are unhoused is that there are much less options, right? There are no cooling centers anymore. Where do people go to get water and hydration? So the risk of heat stroke and heat exhaustion and all of these other dangers are quite high.
What will outreach workers like yourself be doing during this week?
Honestly, what we can do is really Band-Aid solutions. For myself this morning, I'm just going to make sure that people have access to bottles of water, electrolytes and Gatorade. For people who work inside spaces that can open with air conditioning, a lot of places are going to try to stay open and allow people to hang out in drop-in spaces for as long as they're able to.
Yeah, and as you point out, this heat is dangerous. Heat stroke, sunstroke, all of those become issues, especially when you can't get relief. You mentioned that the cooling centers have closed, and some cities in this country have official plans in place that support unhoused people during extreme heat events. Toronto had designated shelters, 24-hour respite centers, where they say people can go and cool off. It operates a street outreach program through the Fred Victor charity. But what's missing from these procedures? Are there things that cities should be doing and maybe they aren't?
The city says that they can access shelters, but the fact of the matter is shelters are full. So, just in May, an average daily of about 997 people would call for a shelter bed, and only 7 people would get access to a shelter space. So while it sounds great on paper, shelters are unavailable. Respites are also quite few and far in between. So, the downtown core has about 1 or 2 spaces where people can go to, but that's about it. And so the city says to use what they call a heat relief network, and which is basically you go online and look at this database, and it shows you where community centers and libraries and swimming pools are. But truth of the matter is the folks that I work with who are unhoused are not going swimming to cool off. Libraries close at a certain time, and we know that malls have security that often kick people out. And so, these places also close at a certain time, and the heat just doesn't stop heating at 5 p.m., right? And so what's missing is a 24-hour solution, and not even just a heat solution, but really we need to be talking about inclement weather solutions, right? Because it can be the heat, it can be the cold, it can be unexpected tornadoes and storms, people that need respite from all of these things.
The number of people experiencing homelessness has escalated in recent years. Between 2018 and 2022, 20% more people became unhoused. So how are the systems in place designed to support people responding to this increase in demand for housing and shelter?
I'm going to say that these systems have been crumbling for quite some time. Status quo was not enough. And so seeing the increased need while relying on mostly status quo measures is just simply not working. For people who are unhoused, who have existing respiratory illnesses, for instance, they are more susceptible to dangers in the heat. And so they might be seeking medical care in hospitals. And we already know that hospitals are understaffed and under-resourced, right? So that's one system that is really struggling. The shelter system, as I mentioned earlier, is beyond capacity. They're really struggling. Ultimately, we desperately need dignified, affordable housing, which, we have not seen all 3 levels of government invest in terms of any kind of strategy. And so it's no wonder that homelessness is increasing, especially at a time when we're all talking about how expensive it is to live, but social assistance rates are still archaic from the 90s. And so all of these gaps are just creating these chasms where people are falling through. And ultimately, this really is life or death for really vulnerable people.
Hey, Lorraine, you mentioned that the city had decided to close the cooling centers. Do you know what's the reason that they gave? Was it cost? Why did they do that?
That's a great question that a number of us have been wondering about. It was several years ago at a city council meeting, and they referenced a number of literature from other cities, including in the States and in Australia, that talks about how other cities have heat relief networks instead. But the literature review that has been done by a number of people across the country, including a professor, A.J. Withers, out at Simon Fraser, shows that actually they didn't rely on the full scope of research that was required for how to actually support vulnerable people in the heat. So the question remains why they closed cooling centers. I have guesses. It's probably around cost and staffing and resources. But, for a city that's spending hundreds of $millions in the FIFA World Cup and continuing to spend so much money on policing, I have questions about why we're actually not looking at root solutions.
Lorraine, we're grateful for the work that you're doing, especially during this week where the heat is dangerous and life-threatening for some people. So thank you.
Thanks for making time.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.